All right, hey guys, this is the first presentation that we go over in class. So this is starting out Unit 1, and with all the notes, I'm going to do this. So if there's anything you miss in class, as far as taking notes, you can refer to these videos and make sure you get everything you need. And then, of course, if you miss class, so if there's a day you miss, and if we do notes that day, you can then watch the video to make sure you get everything you need to know. Just keep in mind the tests and quizzes and things like that will all be lined up mainly with what it is we discuss in class. So if we talk about it in class, especially if it's in notes or do an activity over it, it's liable to be either on a quiz or a test. And also keep in mind, at least for on-level world geography, if you take handwritten notes, you can use those on the quiz. And trust me, you'll need them if you want to be able to pass the quizzes. So make sure you take good handwritten notes. You can do Cornell Notes style. That's what I recommend. But of course, it's up to you to take notes on however way you wish. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first off, looking at the question, what is geography? Of course, we know it's the study of the earth. Where things are located, the study of human and physical features. So when you think of geography, don't just think of, just where things are and just, where countries are and things like that. It's about everything on the planet. So we get into science, we get into human societies, looking at how government is set up and just overall how society is set up. And so in geography, we actually get into a lot of different things. It's not just looking at physical geography, anything like that. So we study, of course, cultures, and we study landforms as well. And the 5 key themes of geography, you need to know these 5 themes of geography throughout the entire class. So for the whole 18 weeks, you'll need to keep track of these as well. So first one's location. And you're just looking at basically where is it is the question you're answering. So that's pretty simple, at least it seems that way. So of course, like where are we? Well, we're in Flower Mound, Texas. Of course, you could also say planet Earth, stuff like that. But it's just asking, where you are specifically. And then, of course, we'll look at, here in a little bit, we'll get into it, but there's absolute location and relative location. And so absolute location, if I were to ask you, what is your absolute location? What I'm asking is coordinates. So I want to know exactly, according to coordinates, where you're located. And then relative location is where you are in regards to something else. So it could be, like Marcus High School is a quarter of a mile south of Sonic. And so you're explaining where something is based on something else. So in relation to that other idea. All right, then place is unique properties of a place. What is it like? So we live in Flower Mound. What is this place like? Well, there's a lot of homes. The demographics here, generally, it's middle and upper class, things like that. So you're describing what the place is like. You could get into architecture, things of that sort. You're just kind of describing what is there. And then movement. This is looking at like diffusion, which is things spreading. Communication, how people move, how goods move, things like that. So basically just how people move around. So again, if you're looking at Flower Mound, people mainly use their vehicles to drive around. The way the city is set up, it's not set up for pedestrians really. So people mainly use cars to move around. And then of course you could get into bigger pictures. A lot of times when we talk about movement, we'll be looking at, human migration, things like that, kind of large scale movement. And then region, this looking at areas, uniform characteristics. So how are places similar or different? So region is generally looking at a much larger area. So maybe like the southern part of the United States, there's certain characteristics we have in common, like weather and things like that, and maybe cultural norms and things of that sort. So, and then of course what we eat and drink, like sweet tea or just iced tea in general is popular here more so in the South. And then human environment interaction. We'll be talking a lot about that throughout the year. And that's just how humans interact with the environment. Basically, that's what decides if a human civilization is going to be successful. If you're able to adapt to your environment and learn how to harness it. And societies that don't learn that end up failing in the long run. All right, so quickly, here's just some divisions of academic geography. Basically, you just need to know the difference between physical geography and human geography. So again, physical geography is looking at landforms and things like that. So you'll have some geology and things like that here, meteorology. Those studies would fall in physical geography. And then human geography is going to look at just the way humans interact. So population, settlements, economic activities. We'll get into government. Of course, cultural things like, what we do for fun. Religion, like I said, political systems, things like that. So we'll focus a lot more so on the human side of things than we will on the physical side. And then here, just trying to get you to kind of have an idea of how our world interacts today. Just looking at the geography of breakfast. Think about what it is you eat for breakfast and where in the world that comes from. So, for example, if you drink coffee, well, your main coffee growers are in Central and South America and also throughout Africa. And because of human migration and because of exploration and, of course, people moving to different areas of the world, and because of trade, now we have access to these goods. So, used to, thousands of years ago, if you wanted coffee, you had to live in the area where coffee was. Well, now because of movement, you can have it anywhere. And then chocolate. So chocolate, there we go. Chocolate was first really discovered here in the Americas. Europeans didn't know anything about chocolate until they came exploring over here, and then they took it from the Aztecs and then took it back to Europe and then made like chocolate bars and things like that out of it. And again, because of exploration, because of trade, that began to spread everywhere. So if you like Nutella, you can thank European explorers. And so here's just breakfast foods and where it shows their origins and where they are today. So again, just kind of an idea of movement and what we rely on. Now moving into culture real quick. Here, what is culture? So in class, basically we just looked at, having you come up with the definition of what you think culture is. And we'll skip on ahead. So the definition of culture is basically a total of knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors shared by and passed on by members of a group. So basically, that's just how people in a certain area behave and think, interact with each other, and things like that. So almost think of culture as like visiting somebody's house. Everybody has their own culture at home, basically, the way things are done and stuff like that. And so each country or each nation, each group of people is going to have its own culture that's going to be unique to it. So visiting another country is like visiting somebody else's house that has different ways of doing things. So as far as the important parts of culture, the most important parts to culture are right here. Language, you need to know that language is what it says, a crystal ball into the culture. That means if you want to really understand a culture, you have to learn their language. You cannot fully understand a way another culture thinks or behaves without knowing the language. You just can't. You're always an outsider looking in when you don't speak it. And just little things like, for example, let's take Inuits in the polar region. They have 15 words for snow, but they don't have any words for window because, what idiot builds a window in an igloo? So you just don't do that. But they have a lot of words for snow because they interact with snow all the time. And so they're going to have words that describe different types of snow they come across. And so even just looking at a language, you can see where physically they live on Earth and what it is they come in contact with a lot. And then another example would be Greek. Greek has several different words for love. There's three main ones, phileo, agape, and eros. And those describe love relationships and different types of human relationships. And so you're able to better describe how it is that you love something. Whereas in our language, in English, you really only have one word. I can say, I really love pizza. I can also say, I really love my wife. Well, obviously, we know that means something totally different. But in other languages, instead of just assuming that I love my wife more than pizza, we know based on the word they use, because they'll have a totally different word for saying I love my wife compared to saying I love pizza. They would have a different way of describing it. And so meaning basically you could assume they care more about those relationships. They care more about how they communicate. And then religion, obviously that's going to determine the ethics and morality of a particular culture. And then nationalism, this is huge. We're going to be talking about this throughout the year. I'll be harping on it a lot. Nationalism is basically it's what brings us together, what unifies us as a group of people. So that's going to be a common history, of course, a common language, common way of behaving and things like that. So again, an attitude and a way of thinking. And if you want nationalism, basically, just to put it easy, is pride in your country. It's patriotism. But in some examples, it can go to an extreme, so much so it can turn into racism. A great example of this would be Hitler and the rise of Nazism in Germany. Well, we'll get into that later, but that is an example of when nationalism, goes too far. And then material culture. This is looking at, again, based on what it is that we own. What is it we spend our money on? What's important to us? And so you can go back a couple of thousand years to one of the earliest civilizations on Earth in the Indus River Valley in India. And archaeologists discovered that this one civilization, they had a lot of children's toys. They're everywhere. Tons of kids' toys. Also, the cities they uncovered were planned out cities, and they were on a grid system. So people didn't just start building randomly. Like, they had them planned out. They had plumbing systems, and this is around 3,500, 4,000 years ago. And so what we can assume from that culture is that most likely it was a peaceful culture because they had time to not only plan their cities out, but they're also building things that aren't required for survival or defense. You know, they're not building a lot of siege weapons. They're not building, walls around their cities. So either they didn't have contact with other cultures around them, or there was physical barriers protecting them to where they didn't have to worry about it. And again, of course, with toys, so we know obviously they had a lot of kids, so family life was important to them. And we know that they had wealth because, again, if people are making children's toys, that means they're not farming. So there must be abundance of food coming into the society, excuse me, to be able to provide for them. So they're able to make things that aren't necessary for human survival. And that's just based off finding some toys, digging in the ground. And so there's a lot you can get just from finding small things really within a culture. And then architecture, looking at the way things are built will reflect a lot. So like, for example, if you look at these two different types of houses you would find here in the U.S., think about if you were going door to door selling something, if you've ever done that before, like selling Girl Scout cookies or anything like that. Obviously, you want to go to houses that look inviting. So if you had to pick between the two, which one you would go to first, most likely you would say the top one. You got a front porch that's open. You got someone sitting there right there facing the road. And so most likely going to be a very nice person that's probably going to think you're cute, a little kid selling stuff, and they're going to buy it. Whereas in this house down here, looks closed off. There's not much of a front porch. It's very private. It's a long way from the sidewalk up to the house. So it's a little bit more foreboding looking at it. And this also reflects kind of the change in American culture. Before, we were more front porch people. We hung out in the front. You had block parties and stuff like that. You played with your neighbors. Kids stayed out until it was dark. We don't do that anymore. Now we play in our backyards. We don't talk to our neighbors. Everything's scary. If you play outside by yourself, someone's going to steal you and you'll get kidnapped. So our culture has changed where now we're more private into ourselves instead of more about the community around us. All right, so now looking at the 5 themes. So first one, location. Like I said, where is it? And as I got into it, you got your coordinate systems, latitude and longitude. You need to know how they work. So absolute location, again, right here, absolute location is using your coordinate system, latitude and longitude, to answer where you are. So as far as how this works, you've got latitude here. So latitude is measuring how many degrees north or south you are of the equator. So for example, Sao Paulo, Brazil is 23 degrees south of the equator. Kyoto, Japan is 35 degrees north of the equator. So it's all the lines going this way. Crossing the globe is your lines of latitude. So they go from 0 degrees at the equator up to 90 degrees around the polar region. And so about 1 degree is about 69, 70 miles is what 1 degree equals. So that's latitude. And then longitude is going to be lines going from north to south. So they're going down. It may help you to think that they're long or something like that. That is longitude. So this starts at right here. This is the prime meridian. So the equator is 0 degrees latitude. The prime meridian is 0 degrees longitude. This goes from 0 to 180 degrees. So on this side of the Earth would be 0. When you go on this side from the North Pole and you take it down across the Pacific Ocean, that's the international date line. That's 180 degrees on the other side. So this is measured east to west. So if you're on this side of the prime meridian, you're in the western hemisphere. So everything's going to be west. So here in Dallas, we're 97 degrees west of the prime meridian. On this side of the Earth is east, all the way to the international date line. So when we talk about western and eastern hemisphere, this is the dividing line, and this is going to come up a lot throughout the year. So the eastern hemisphere is over here. So much of Africa, some of Europe, actually a good portion of it, and then all of Asia is in there, Australia, all of that is eastern hemisphere. And then west is a little bit of Africa, a little bit of Europe, and then the Americas fall in the western hemisphere. All right, so when we look at it together, so here you got your grid system. So you got latitude. So like New York City, for example, is 40 degrees north latitude. You always start with latitude when you're listing it. So 40 degrees north latitude, and then you're looking at about 72 degrees west longitude. So remember, latitude first, so that's the lines going this way across the Earth, and then longitude is next, the lines going down from north to south pole, connecting them together. The prime meridian is right here, 0 degrees longitude. Equator right here is 0 degrees latitude. So if you're right here at the intersection of the equator and the prime meridian, you're going to be 0 degrees and 0 degrees, just flat zero on both. All right, movement. Just how people and things move around. So key terms here is diffusion. We'll talk about this one a lot throughout the year. So again, how people and ideas move from place to place. So you can think of like blue jeans, for example. Blue jeans were developed here in the U.S., but now they're all over the world. Another example would be Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola started in Atlanta, Georgia, diffused throughout the U.S., and now it's throughout the world. Migration, of course, is people moving across the planet, and of course we'll look at reasons why. And then globalization, another key term, is how we're more interconnected through trade and exchange, and of course travel and things like that. So we're much more connected than we used to be. All right, then place, what is it like? So here you're really looking at everything, like how it makes you feel, really. So you can kind of look at the 5 senses, like the architecture, things like that. So you can look at, for example, when you come to school, based on how the school looks, how does it make you feel? You know, does the natural light help you feel more comfortable? You know, or does it look sterile? Things like that. How do you feel when you go home? You know, and how does your home look? So that gets into place and what it's like. And so here you can get a sense of place. Like think about how you would feel at these different locations, whether you're in the small town Groveland, Cleveland, or I said Cleveland, California, where you got a bookstore and then 2 saloons right in a row, or if you're down on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, which is crazy, or if you're at McDonald's, depressed and eating a Happy Meal, or at this creepy Texaco. You know, how would you feel at each location? You know, or like Hong Kong. Imagine if I just dropped you off in the middle of that city. How would that make you feel if you had no idea how to get around and just looking at the city and how compact it is? We'll skip some of these photos that we went through in class, just kind of hitting that. I will point out, though, it's kind of interesting. It's in Baker, California. This is the largest thermometer on Earth. It gets well over 100 degrees. And they got some nasty food there. I mean, look, 3 Denny's signs. Like, if you can't see where Denny's is at this point, like, obviously you're blind. But I guess Denny's is a big deal in Baker, California, which means I won't go there. All right, some other key concepts. So we look at, let me go back real quick. So now we're at region, so how places are similar or different from each other. So key concepts, you got formal, functional, perceptual regions. This gets a little bit confusing. So formal region is real simple. That's just looking at, says all members share a characteristic. Real easy example of a formal region would be like Texas. It has clear borders. It has a government that runs the state, things like that. So that's a formal region. A functional region, the definition is defined by node of activity and distance decay from center. Now that sounds confusing and weird. Easy example, think of a radio station. If you're listening to a Dallas radio station and you're driving to Oklahoma, as you get closer to Oklahoma, the radio station is going to begin to fade out and you won't hear it anymore. So that's distance decay. So that's basically the activity is going away. The node of activity in the case would be the radio station. It would be actually where the radio station is. That's the node of activity. Distance decay is going away from where that activity is. A more geography example would be like I-35. I-35 is used for trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And so obviously if you set up a business and you trade with those countries, you're going to want to be near I-35 so you can use it for trade. And you don't have to drive far off the interstate to get to your factory. So you're going to see more activity in relation to trade with Mexico and Canada along I-35. As you get away from I-35, east or west, you get away from it, you're going to see less and less activity in relation to trade with Mexico and Canada because there's no reason to be that far away from I-35. So it has a certain function. It plays a function, and as you get away from that, you're not going to see that activity anymore. And then a perceptual region, this can be a little bit confusing too. This is generally based on cultural identity. So the best example is just look at this photo. Here you see different perceptions of what the South is. So some people may perceive the South to be based on the Confederate States of America. You know, what What state seceded from the Union during the Civil War? So all this would be the South. Some people view the South as less than 50% of people graduated from high school because a stereotype. Oh, bell. A stereotype of the South is that they're not as highly educated, so they may do it based on education. Or at least where 50% of the people are Baptist or more, because another stereotype of the South is that you have a lot of Christians and they're mainly Baptist. And then another perception could be cotton producing area, because that's what the South was known for, is producing cotton. So they may use that line. Or they may look at weather, winter precipitation that's less than 20 inches or more than 20 inches. So north of that, you get more than 20 inches. Or they may see where the last frost is in March. And use that line. So there's all different ways to say where the South is and what is part of the South. And there's no right answer. I mean, you can't say anyone's wrong because it's on their perception. So remember, when you see the word perception or perceptual, you're talking about the way somebody sees it. And so your way of seeing it's going to be different than the way I see it. So I perceive it differently than you. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean you're right. It's just, for us, that's how we view it, and that's fine. So that's going to be different for each person. Biomes, we're not going to do a whole lot of. Basically, a biome is just a large region that has a similar characteristic. So, for example, we're in a grassland. Basically, that's a lot of Texas all the way up through Saskatchewan and Canada. So all of that's grassland. So we're going to see similar animals, similar economic activities, like farming is going to occur in this area, livestock raising, things like that. All right, human-environment interaction. How do humans interact with their environment? So that's the last one. So as I said before, societies that are successful at adapting to their environment win, and those that aren't lose out. It's like in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, 1,000 years ago. Native Americans that lived there in this arid region figured out how to get water there and supply their society, and they were successful. Whereas over in Easter Island, Polynesia, they were not successful. They spent too much time building these faces and too little time learning how to live on the island and getting food and stuff like that, and they ended up dying. So that's basically human-environment interaction. It's just interacting with the environment. Let's move on. Let's go to this one here. So this is, of course, an old picture of New York City from before 9/11, but again, thinking how the environment determines how we build cities. So New York City is very compact and built up because Manhattan Island is so tiny. And so they had to build up in order to get everybody on there. And so the way the environment is set up is going to determine the way our cities are built. And then you look here in Bali, Indonesia, they don't have any flat land to farm on, so they had to figure out how to do terrace farming. So where you cut stair steps into the sides of hills and mountains and then farm that way. So here they're farming rice throughout that region. It's really pretty. We already talked about globalization, so so we're doing the theme of region. So like I said, just kind of big areas that we may look at. So like along here is known as like Mesoamerica, because here you of course have a lot of Hispanics that live along that area, so on and so forth. So basically it's just a large region that has certain characteristics in common. The movement, as we've talked about before, is just how people and ideas move. And then really I just have a lot of photos of crazy ways people move throughout the world, like on a motorcycle, that poor woman. And then here, there's 5 people on this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is insane. Walking across that bridge, they look so calm. That's what I don't get. They're like us every day. Like, who doesn't walk across a rope bridge, across a river where you could just fall and die at any moment? And then carrying a refrigerator, some pigs for dinner, I guess. Again, just crossing the river calmly, got to get to work somehow. Recycling in China. And then she would be arrested here in the U.S. Little baby in the hamper down there. God, it's just amazing they survive. I guess some grass there, some more recycling, chickens and stuff. Getting some chairs around there. That I feel like it's got to be Photoshopped, but it's still cool looking. More pigs. That's a lot of pigs really crammed in there. So he's really resourceful. Some eggs, some ducks and chickens, tires. This is just incredible, how people get around. So forget SUVs. They're doing good on their own. All right, so that's it for the first day, the first presentation. That's one of the longer ones that we do, just kind of starting out. But that's the first day, what we covered. So again, watch this as many times as you need to. Take some notes So remember, any notes you write down you can use on the quiz, and the quiz is the day before the first test. So anyways, just again, like I said, watch it as many times as you need to. Make sure you always refer to it whenever you need it. We'll talk soon.